Hi, good afternoon. Pleasure to be here. My name's David Greenberg. I'm here to tell you a little bit about what we've been doing over the last 3 years as a result of being finalists on the Duke of York's Pitch at Palace program. So that was something that we went through a few years ago, where hundreds of startups apply and a few get to go and pitch to the Duke of York and sometimes to the Queen in order to build network and gain support from the royal family and their network, which was, as you can probably imagine, quite an amazing experience. So the company that I founded a few years ago is called Eave. Eave is involved with industrial noise control. I'll tell you a little bit about what that actually means, what that is, and then about how, our growth over the last few years, and a little bit why we're doing that. So it starts off with a problem. It's an unusual problem that most people have never heard of or even thought about. It's one of occupational health, and it's one of people working in hazardous levels of noise. That's kind of a niche thing that you might think, but actually 46 million people in Europe work in hazardous noise every day. And when you might ask, well, what's the issue with that? Well, people go deaf from working in noise, despite available hearing protection. And as bizarre and as niche as that sounds again, I'll explain that a bit further as well. So you've got lots of people in Europe working in noise in construction and manufacturing industries, and it's actually the responsibility of employers to protect their employees when they're working in hazardous noise. Of course, not just noise, also dust, radiation, various gases that are harmful to people and to employees. But the system for protecting people at work is actually broken. This is something that I experienced because I was working in hospitals with people who visited because they had got poorly as a result of their work. And this is something that was really quite frustrating because as a doctor, when I was working in the NHS, I would see people once it was too late. And you'll probably know that occupational health is something that can only really be, or occupational disease, is only something that can be prevented and very rarely cured. Certainly things like cancer, asbestosis, vision loss, skin cancer, these are all things that are caused very frequently at work, especially for people in the manufacturing and construction industries. And for noise, it's something that is not reversible. And so you actually have millions of people in just the UK who are going deaf, causing loss of quality of life, basically. And there's something in health economics called disability-adjusted life years. And hearing loss is one of the major or main disabling factors for our society. And it's really an unusual one because you don't look at a person and know that they've lost their hearing or that they've got raging tinnitus or ringing in their ears. But actually there's many people, about 1 in 10 have tinnitus that affects their quality of life. So the system for protecting people at work is broken, especially when it comes to noise. And that's because it's really difficult to manage and monitor and mitigate the risks of people working in noise. You need a whole bunch of technical equipment and consultants and awareness in order to actually protect the people, not to mention just the hearing protection as well. But who needs to wear the hearing protection? You can't just look at a person and look at a workplace and know that they're at risk, because noise is actually quite a difficult thing to manage, whether it's coming from heavy machinery or speakers in a nightclub. There's obviously major differences between people exposed in their leisure time, whether they're playing the drums or whatever it might be, and exposed due to their workplace. So the method for protecting people is broken, and what that really means is it's very expensive, complex, and actually very, very inaccurate. And this was the problem that we were presenting at the Pitch at Palace program, and of course we therefore came with a solution that we wanted to tell people about, and that's what we've been working on for the last few years, and have now started to roll that out into some major household name corporates, which is quite exciting for us. So the solution is pretty obvious when you think about it. The problem with hearing protection is you can't communicate when you wear it, and therefore you need to take it off to communicate in order to do your job. We've spoken with thousands of highway workers who will say, I would rather be deaf than dead. Because if I wear my hearing protection when I'm working on the highway, I can't hear that sleeping civilian driver who's drifted over into my work area and I get hit. So they won't wear the hearing protection. So yes, they survive, but unfortunately over years of this sort of work, they also go deaf. And so their last 20 or 30 years of life is really of very low quality. So we built the ability to hear and communicate into the pair of ear defenders. Pretty simple, pretty basic. But the other thing that we did is actually build into the ear defenders the ability to know what exposure is actually taking place, so that at any moment, the health and safety officer can basically log on to a web browser and see their entire workforce and see who is where and what they're being exposed to. And what that means is you can actually prevent issues from arising. Hearing loss is a long lead time disability. It might take 10 or 15 years of exposure depending on the type of noise and the frequency of the noise and the intensity of the noise. Of course, if it's blast noise, it can happen immediately. You get permanent hearing loss immediately, which is pretty unfortunate. But when it's long lead time exposure to 80, 90, 100 decibels every day in, day out, you can actually see that exposure build up using our system. So health and safety officers in construction companies, manufacturing companies have really jumped on this because it takes them from guessing what their issues are and what their risks are to knowing. And it seems like such a simple thing, but actually when you're managing, let's say, 100,000 people, and you maybe are a team of 10 health and safety officers, the more you know, the better, because otherwise you're carrying a huge amount of risk, which is at some point going to need to be paid down. So that's it for the slides bit. What I would like to talk to you now about is why we're doing this, and a little bit about working with corporates, because B2B marketing and B2B advertising is a real challenge, but it's sort of we can learn a lot from that experience, and it's also therefore a bit relevant to, I think, this conference, this program. So why we're doing it, I mentioned before that I was a doctor working in the NHS. I was working specifically in the field of ear, nose, and throat, so people who had lost their hearing was my kind of specialty, but typically that meant do a hearing test and give them a hearing aid, and that was incredibly unsatisfying, because a person, once they have a hearing aid, first of all, they hate it, they don't like to use it. Most people have a grandparent who maybe uses a hearing aid, or maybe a parent, or maybe themselves, but typically they don't like it, although it does change their life for the better. And so working in the hospital, I wanted to find the root cause of hearing loss. And besides aging, noise exposure is the major cause of hearing loss. And actually, there's a lot of data that suggests there's no such thing as age-related hearing loss. It's actually all noise-induced, which is quite interesting. And that's not in sort of in the NHS protocol. If you are 80 years old, there's an expectation that you'll have a hearing loss. Our case, or what we're saying at Eave, is that that shouldn't be the case, because you have sub-Saharan African tribes who, at the age of 70 or 80, still have really good hearing in the 70 and 80-year-olds, compared to an urban person who will not have good hearing. And so that's just because, not because they've worked in noise all their life, but just because it's a very noisy world that we live in, whether it's the streets outside or our day jobs. Lots of guys in here wearing headphones. Those headphones typically won't have noise limiters on. Unfortunately, you do it long enough, you'll get a hearing loss or at least tinnitus, which is not a pleasant thing. And most people who have lived a little bit will already have experienced tinnitus from a night out. Unfortunately, that is the precursor to permanent hearing loss, and it's not pleasant. I've got ongoing tinnitus. A lot of people in the team at the company also have tinnitus in some form, because we tend to attract people who care a lot about sound, audio, noise, and preventing it from happening to other people. So that's a little about why we do it, the frustrations of giving people hearing aids. Let's go back to the root cause and stop people from getting noise exposure in the first place. And the last thing I'd like to talk about is working with corporates. So we have about 100 corporates on our kind of contacts who we're working with. And the reason that they work with us is because they know that they've got a big problem. Typically, they'll have, on a weekly basis, new claims for noise-induced hearing loss, noise-induced stress, noise-induced tinnitus, and typically they will just sort of pay out. Insurance covers it, they'll pay out, and that's not really a healthy situation for anybody. So we're working with them to reduce that risk that they're carrying. But working with corporates, we find that there's typically 10 decision makers before they'll even trial the system. As I said, we're about a 3 or 4 year old company now. When we started on pitch at Palace, we were 4 people, and now we're 20 people. So over a few years, that's pretty good going. And we're looking to grow a lot more in the coming years as all the trial phases and all the product development is now completed. And now it's really about marketing, communications, advertising, sales. So that's really where we are now. I'm not sure how long I've got left, but I'm sort of happy to more or less wrap it up now. I'm here with my colleague Claire, and we're going to visit a company in Spain this afternoon to do an installation there. So forgive me for running off, but if anyone is interested in our journey or our story about noise and hearing loss, as obscure as it sounds, it's pretty interesting once you get into it, and it will impact us more as time goes on, given the prevalence of consumer headphones that don't have limiters in. Another thing that I would like to mention just on closing is that we're going to be doing the Tube Challenge, which for those of you that don't know is the Guinness World Record for visiting all of the tube stations in London on the London Underground. And the record that currently stands is, I think, 15 hours, 45 minutes. And we're aiming to break that record while at the same time mapping the noise on the entire tube network. Because for those of you that commute in central London, you may have at times noticed that it gets really, really loud. Well, it does. It does get really, really loud, and actually to the point where it can trigger people's tinnitus. And if you travel on it long enough and for a long enough period of time, you will also, unfortunately, get permanent hearing loss. And so we're going to be raising awareness by doing the Tube Challenge, hopefully beating the Guinness World Record for visiting all tube stations in the shortest period of time, while at the same time producing the data for Transport for London to maybe do something about the noise on the Underground. So that's the last thing that I'd like to mention at this point. Thank you all so much for your time and for listening, and I look forward to speaking to you further. Thank you.